Good morning. I'm Steve Altition, Director of Client Partnerships here at Landerholm Family Law. Welcome to our Facebook Live broadcast. Today, we want to focus on some specific issues that parents have about issues with they as parents and their children face as the new school year prepares to start. For that, we have Behavioral Analyst Chris Messina with us. Hey, welcome back, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve.
You bet. We also have Landerholm Family Law's Marketing Director, Kari Landerholm here. Welcome, Kari.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Chris.
So, Kari, I know this is a topic that is particularly close to you as a mother of two school-age kids. And not just you, but other parents you have spoken to as well. I also understand you have some specific questions you'd like to ask Chris. So, without any further ado, Kari, let's get started and let you go with your first question.
Okay. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Kari.
I'm really excited to actually do this panel or Facebook Live just because with the new state orders that have been implemented for getting back to school, I feel like all of us parents are having this stress and anxiety about what we need to be doing and thinking about. The most common theme that I have been hearing from a lot of mom friends is this mantra of, I can't do this, or how am I going to do this, or I don't want to do this. It just feels very overwhelming. And it's almost as if we feel like we're failing before we even begin because there's so much on our plates. Do you have any suggestions for how we can alter that viewpoint or how to get out of that thought process going forward?
I think I can't do this will be the most commonly uttered 4 words of 2020. I know I have uttered them myself many, many times through this pandemic. So the reality is, if we expect ourselves and our experiences to look like they did pre-pandemic, we are setting ourselves up for failure before we even get started. So I think the biggest sort of step we can take to move away from that thinking is to start to define for ourselves, what do we mean by this, right? I can't do this. Mm-hmm. Well, what does this look like? Because it should not and will not look the way that it did before this all began. So it really boils down to, what are your expectations? So, we all had expectations of ourselves as parents and our children as students and learners prior to this beginning. Those are going to have to, and they should shift and be modified. So something that I would recommend that parents start to take a look at well before the school year begins, is what are your expectations of yourself as a parent, right? Literally get out some sticky notes and make a sort of collection of expectations that you have of yourself. Then make a collection of expectations you have of your child. And then kind of zoom out and take a very good hard look at the reality of what that means. We are not going to be able to manage the same way we once did when we are trying to work full time, trying to manage our kids' behavior at home, monitor their education. So even if it means reducing, paring back, scaling back, whatever, we may be uncomfortable with that, but we have to modify those expectations or we will literally set ourselves up for constant disappointment.
Can we involve our kids in that sticky note creation and have them be part of the conversation of narrowing down the priorities and what we can actually feel like we can accomplish and get done? And how do we go about doing that? Or is this something that as a parent, we should be deciding for them?
That's a great question. I think kids feel utterly out of control during this time. Their anxiety, like ours, is at an all-time high. Yeah. So when and where we can find opportunities to give our kids control, let's do it. And it's an opportunity to try that in new ways that we may have not, done so prior to the pandemic. So the way I like to encourage parents to try thinking about expectations is to initially try it as the adult or adults in the home. Right. So I would go through that exercise looking at, what do I expect of myself? Because honestly, some of this is self-reflective work. right?
Sure.
We're really hard on ourselves as parents, and we hold
Yeah.
ourselves usually to pretty high standards. So
Yeah.
take a look at, what are you expecting? What have you historically expected from yourself as a parent? What have you honestly expected from your kids? Because these are tough conversations to have with ourselves and with our
Yeah.
kids. So I would do that exercise as the adults first. And then I might invite the kids into looking at those expectations you have of them. Certainly, they don't need to be privy to what you expect of yourselves unless you want to share some of that, right? Vulnerability is going to go a long way here, and kids understanding we're in this with you. This is not something unique to kids struggling, right? We need to sort of let them understand, I get it, right? I'm confused too. I don't have any easy answers. But I would say, once you've looked at, what have I historically expected from my child? Kind of share that conversation with them. What can we expect? Solicit their input throughout all of this, because it's going to make, you're going to get some real headway into getting buy-in from your kids when
Right.
you invite them into that conversation.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, I feel like having the correct expectations is really difficult. I mean, even in a social media heavy world where you see, maybe your neighbor down the street or friend of a friend of a friend has their kids still enrolled in, concert piano lessons virtually, and whatever language they're learning, they've, hired a private tutor, or they have these new educational pods that everybody's forming if you can't get your kids back to school. And it just feels like the task list has become exponentially larger. So is it, can we give ourselves permission to have 3 basic things on the list of sticky notes?
We can
Or
absolutely, listen, there are certain fundamental things that must occur
yeah,
for human beings to survive, right? So
yeah,
honestly, when we say I can't do this, well, if this means getting everybody up, logged onto the screens where they need to be to attend a class, and food in everyone's mouths, that might be okay to start. If that's what you can manage, that's what you can manage. It's a very slippery slope to start comparing ourselves to the folks down the street with,
for sure.
3 different foreign language classes and oboe lessons. I was
Yeah,
talking with a family the other day, and a mom shared that she was feeling really ashamed of herself as a parent, that she was, really not holding up her end of the bargain by just, I think she had some workbooks she got at Target and was requiring the kids to do 20 minutes a day. And she said, this is all I've asked them to do, and they're still, battling me. Meanwhile, kids down here are taking the concert piano lessons.
yeah,
The shame game will get you nowhere, because the truth is, under the surface, every single one of us, every parent is struggling
yes,
in some way, shape, or form. You do what you can do. So if ever there was a time to stop shaming and comparing, it's now. It is an exercise in utter frustration and has no utility.
yeah. I mean, that makes complete sense, because even in the early days of the shutdown, I'm thinking to myself, like, how is my oldest child not able to be more autonomous and get things done? And it's that comparing and contrasting to, maybe his friends seem to be able to stay on task better. And it took a lot of redirection, and almost it felt like nagging at times to just get it done, get your work done, finish this assignment, how much longer is it going to take? And that internal dialogue that I was having about, why isn't he more autonomous with this?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think recruiting connection with other parents through this is really helpful, can be really important. But it's a fine line to walk, because we want to relate, we want to connect, but we don't want to start comparing.
Really.
I hear a lot from parents that, my kids should be able to do these things. They're able to do these things at school. They
Yeah,
should be able to do them at home. So sometimes we blame ourselves for that. Sometimes we blame the kids, or a combination of both. But the reality of behavior is this: even if we have a skill in our repertoire, right? We can do something at school. I can attend for 45 minutes during a math class. The conditions at school are entirely different than the conditions at home. Our behavior is largely dictated by our environment.
sure.
So I think recognizing that as parents, we are not teachers. Well, some of us maybe, but not, even still, you don't have your teacher hat on, you have your parent hat on. We cannot do what the teachers are doing at school. We do not create an identical environment. And the truth is, social consequences at school weigh very heavily on our child's behavior. Remember, that's totally absent in the home environment.
Yeah.
So they're not responding to social cues. They're not aware that, you may get sent to the office or asked to leave the classroom if you're talking. Those consequences, in large part, dictate how our kids behave at school. So now to strip that all away, that's a tall order to try and place on ourselves as parents, that we should somehow be able to replicate that. We simply can't. So you're going to see that a kid who can do something in school may really struggle with it at home. And that's going to require some problem solving with your child.
Right.
But go back to that list of expectations. If you expect your kid to behave in an identical fashion at school and at home,
yeah,
I'm not so sure that's a realistic expectation for your kids.
Sure. Is there something that we can do in the home environment to sort of replicate the idea that school starts now? Now is the time to get to work. Now is the time to switch that hat on about learning and being ready. Is there something that we can mimic that might help set us on a good foot forward?
Sure. And I think having these conversations with your kids as soon as you possibly can, we're already into August and some schools start 3 or 4 weeks from now. So I think being proactive is going to be super important. So if you have not started having some conversations with your kids, because presumably they all are aware that we'll be in a virtual environment for who knows how long really, I would have those now. And they would look something like this. Once you are privy to how your child's week is set up, so I don't know how many school sessions per day, per week, each parent will know that. You're going to want to establish a pretty consistent schedule. When kids go to school, their schedules are really predictable. Some predictability is going to go a really long way with your kids. Now, there are some non-negotiables in that schedule, right? So if you've got an 11:30 class and a 2 o'clock class, well, obviously you're going to log on and attend those classes. Yeah. Where you have some flexibility, I strongly encourage doing some collaborative problem solving with your kids. Invite them in because you're more likely to get compliance and buy-in if you look at that day and say, what else are we going to do? What feels manageable for your child, right? So I don't think setting up an 8-hour school day that mirrors what they have in school is going to be realistic, right? So maybe you've got some flexibility in there, but if your child participates in planning that schedule, I think it's going to go a long way. And the other piece is that, depending on your home environment, it's not always reasonable to have a quiet, separate room where your child can work. I mean, let's be honest. However, what I see a lot of families default to, whether it's for tutoring after school or now this homeschool scenario, is that they'll want their kids to work at the kitchen table or the kitchen island or the dining room because they can keep an eye on their child. Yeah. While I understand the thinking behind that, it's a really difficult place for a child to attend when there's all sorts of sort of stimuli to tune out. And the way that behavior works is when you go into school, right? So a child sees their desk, they see the classroom environment, it triggers for them, it signals certain behaviors occur here, right? It's the same reason you and I walk into Starbucks and we order a coffee from the person in the green apron and we don't ask them to fill our gas tank because we have learned this is what you do when you come here. That's exactly what happens at school. So if we can find a space where we have them, even if it's out of sight, I think that's preferable to doing it at the kitchen table. Create some kind of workspace, whether you've got to get a collapsible fold-up table with your whiteboard and your writing utensils. Create that space. Have a timer, right? So you can give your child some expectations. But I think that's going to go a long way to sort of to kind of mimic in some way, shape, or form the signaling that this is where you work. Yeah. I was working with kids in the spring and they were reading in their beds, trying to do reading comprehension in their beds. And it's like, maybe for some kids that might work, sure. But your child, and every parent has to make that decision, right? If you think your child can be successful in their bedroom, okay. From my perspective, from where I sit, having a designated space is going to be super important.
Does that follow through then to, having them get up and get dressed and ready for the day? Or is it okay to chug along in our pajamas all day?
Well, actually, Steve and I talked about this in the past, the idea that, you dress for the day you want, right? Yeah. I mean, personally, I think we all joke and we kind of all lift our pajama pants up during our Zooms as adults and say, what pajama pants do you have on?
Yeah.
And then we can laugh about it. And, there are times when that's okay. I think that if we get our kids up, we get them fed, we regulate bedtimes. I know this is a much more difficult thing to do in these kind of bizarre times, but as much to whatever extent you can to make it feel like, we wouldn't let our kids go to school in pajamas unless it's pajama day. So right, get up, get dressed, have the same rhythm. Kids will say to me, but I'm sleeping the same, the same number of hours. It doesn't matter. The human butt, right? Like you are conditioned to go to bed at 9:30 and wake up at 7 for school, whatever. Try to be as consistent as possible, because the reality is, I think that will reduce anxiety, and I've seen it reduce anxiety. Kids don't know, depending on their age in particular, like how to self-modulate. We need to do that for them. And if life feels as normal as possible, like you don't get to wear PJs and wake up at 10 because class starts at 10:30, we're doing them a huge service by providing for them the structure. It's more work for us. Yeah. Bottom line, I have tried every which way. I have 2 of my own as well. So I thought, how do I get out of this? And what's the path of least resistance here? It's just more work for us. I don't think there are any easy answers or any kind of shortcuts we can take if we really want to do, the best for our kids.
Right.
Wow.
Just setting up did you have something, Steve?
Well, I was just thinking, you talked about anxiety, and that seems to me, in my world, when I look at parents also, that's a driving force right now. And a lot of it seems to stem from almost a fatalistic view of what's happening right now. And they're not worried about tomorrow or the next day or the next day. They're focusing on 2021. Are we even going to be, is this what we're going to be doing in 2022? And it seems that makes it tougher to kind of get into a flow if you're additionally worrying about the big picture. Maybe sometimes that has to be kind of set aside, at least in your planning.
It does. And I think as parents, our default screen in our brain is always to look so long-term, right? Yeah. That's how we survive. Right now with the uncertainty, uncertainty breeds so much anxiety in all humans, kids and adults alike. It's probably going to require some real intentionality for parents to do this. But I think, if we can look weeks, of course we have to look at weeks at a glance. We're not going to schedule a day to day as I'm sitting here talking about planning and consistency. But there is no long-term benefit right now to look at spring. It's like for me, when I walk into my kitchen, and one of the things on my list of expectations that I've had to set aside, so I've got my sticky notes and I put the kitchen cleaning way over here because that's not happening. When you see that mound of dishes, you don't even know where to begin, right? You've got to start with one dish. If I look at that, it's that state of overwhelm literally paralyzes you. So what's the good in looking, at December? I've heard parents say to me, well, our school district gave us a date that we, may continue virtual out, beyond that. And they're panicking. Okay, well, let's just wait and see, right? Yeah. Try and, we have an opportunity here while we're all managing anxiety to see one real silver lining, which I think is relationship building with our kids. When have we in the past, and will we maybe ever, I hope never again, have this concentrated time with our kids? It may be that focusing on connection and empathy with your child and recognizing we're all struggling in this together, which is kind of a unique situation for kids and adults to be struggling in such a similar way.
Very.
If you focus on building a relationship, heck, I'd rather see that develop rather, if math skills maybe kind of just, plateau a little bit. That feels really important to me right now for kids' kind of management of their emotions during this.
Yeah, because it feels like, talking about this anxiety and this stress and overwhelm, it feels like we're all having to now put on multiple hats. We're having to be teacher. We're having to be Betty Crocker. The last thing I want to do is think about dinner at night and what are we going to eat? It's like,
I know. I think, how can we have so many meals?
Yeah, I'm so tired of that. What's for dinner? But then, it's the houses are dirtier because we're home more and more laundry is needing to get done. And it's like all of these things, not to mention working from home and trying to manage multiple hats than we ever have before. And it feels very overwhelming. It's hard to pull back and compartmentalize. And then, throwing in having to try to motivate your kids to stay on task, or, encourage them, this is, just the day. We're only trying to get through this one assignment. It just feels daunting. And I don't know if setting those expectations and sort of cleaning out and reprioritizing helps alleviate and helps us to compartmentalize, so we have something to refer back to. It can lower our anxiety. Or, like, do you see that as sort of something that's really helpful with that?
Absolutely. So when I referenced earlier, like literally getting sticky notes and making your columns of, okay, here's what I've always expected of myself and my kids. Literally take your sticky notes. I would leave them somewhere visible, whether it's in your office or in the family kitchen message center. Literally take the sticky note and place it over here so that you can prioritize, what can I manage? In the same way that we talk about a child, we go, well, they should be able to do this at home.
Right.
Why should they be able to? If we operate from an assumption that kids and adults do well if they can, right? Then we go, okay, there is a reason that this child is not operating at full capacity or with the same skill set here. Same holds true for us. And I think, you mentioned earlier, hey, what if I have 3 things on my list? I would rather a family have 3 things, start to navigate that sort of conversation with the self about, all right, I've got to be gentle with myself and not so shameful, and do those 3 things well, right? So I think this is an opportunity to be pretty gracious with ourselves, which I don't think a lot of parents are.
No, we're not.
No, and I think, for parents, the sort of tendency is going to feel like I've got to be a teacher and I've got to be a counselor. No, you do not. And fortunately, the schools have had much more time to prepare for the fall, so it'll be a lot more dialed in terms of structure. No, we are not their teachers and we are not their therapists. Advocate for your kids to get the support that they need. There are people forming tutoring pods and all sorts of things. So get the help you need. And if your child is in a position where you are wondering about their mental wellness,
right,
reach out to, my first line would be to reach out to the school psychologist, which most schools have, or school counselor. Do not hold yourself accountable to play all of these roles. It will be crazy making, and you literally can't do it. Even trained individuals have other jobs. That is not going to yield great results if we try and tackle that.
Yeah. How do you
Chris.
know if your child needs help or has an issue with mental hygiene?
Great question, because, I think everybody's kind of going a little bananas right now. Okay, well, we expect some fluctuation. I mean, look, your child's baseline. I think only a parent can answer. And sometimes you might have to bounce it off the other parent just to kind of make sure that you're assessing this correctly. But when something is dramatically different enough that your antenna go up. If your antenna, even just one, starts to, pop up, I would always err on the side of caution. This is a time when we're going to see a lot of mental health crises. Err on the side of caution. Reach out to the school, or reach out. A lot of pediatricians' offices have folks on staff. A lot of virtual options. Always err on the side of caution, but trust your gut.
Right.
A parent knows when something's off.
Right. Well, and I feel like, we have to give our kids permission to have a bad day too. If they're feeling down for a few days, is that okay if they bounce back, the 3rd day? Or is there a way that we can engage them in conversations in a positive manner, instead of them feeling like they're being nagged about getting things done, that helps them have a say in what's going on, or that can open up that conversation with the parent?
Yeah, that's an important thing to think about, because when we look at behavior, we look at concerning behavior, we look at a pattern over time. So 2 or 3 days, if a kid's kind of mopey, and kids tend to be like retreating to their bedrooms a little more. Steve and I had talked in the past about kids doing more tech phone time quietly in their room.
Right.
That's to be expected. But if you see a trend, I look over a course of 2 weeks. If you're seeing a trend that's enduring that long, I would say go ahead and reach out. And how do you sort of listen, kids they house the information that we want. If you're wondering about your kid, go to your kid. They've got the information inside here somewhere. How do you get them to start even considering talking about it? Yeah. If we go at them with anything that feels like an attack, a question that, may sort of back them into a corner, you're going to get nowhere. But if you come at them with an observation, so let's say you observe your kid retreating for 10, 12 days. If you share with them your observation, hey, I've been noticing that, you've been fill in the blank, pulling back, or what's going on? What's up? Ask it, ask them, recruit it, in a very neutral posture, not when they are engaged in the moment of behavior, but when they seem to be available and calm. Let them share with you that empathy, and then let them know you understand. I see you retreating. I want to retreat too. I think if they see the adults in their lives are experiencing the same range of emotions, it might help them to feel, comfortable being open and vulnerable.
Right. Is there a term for those? Like the way that you go about those conversations and starting it with them?
So the empathy statement is sort of embedded in this collaborative problem solving approach, which, I would strongly recommend parents go online and do some deep digging into that approach. At the core is empathy and relating to our kids so that we can then literally collaborate with them to come up with solutions that we can both live with.
Right. So do we, with everything going on and having to reprioritize and, lessen our expectations of us and our children, is this something where we should just not have any goals whatsoever for the foreseeable future until this pandemic is over? Or can we set some new goals, and would that help in having something to look forward to or something you can accomplish?
I think when we talk about shifting expectations, a lot of parents start to feel like I'm some kind of submissive parent. Don't I have to hold them accountable? Isn't that the point? Because of the stress for everybody, it really is the best path forward. But when I talked earlier about this opportunity to maybe relationship build, well, what that looks like in action is different for every family, right? So my suggestion is, well, hey, you know what? If relationship building is going to take the form of this family is going to focus on kind of cleaning up our diet and healthy eating together, or like my kids and I were trying to do some running together. Whether, that may be reading a shared book together and having your own little book club, whatever. There are a million ways that can take form. But I think having goals that really sort of have a foundation of relationship building, probably pretty prudent to think about that. I don't think we need to drop all expectations, just the more sort of traditional school year homework expectations we're going to need to take a close hard look at those.
Right.
Which is hard. Yeah.
It's very hard.
Chris, you're talking about goals, with the pandemic especially. What about kids? I mean, kids have goals and kids have expectations that they are built in over the years and may not just sort of organically come up. And I think of especially kids as they get into high school and toward college, who maybe, for years, part of their structure and their goal has been doing things to get into the college they want to get into, Cal School of the Arts, NYU, Stanford. And that goal, that is still built into their sort of DNA. And is there things that can be done to bring that out and talk about that? Because it seems like there's goals there of the kids that need to kind of also be looked at in a different manner, and assured that maybe it's not going to kill you to
right
not get that last piano thing in.
Two thoughts. When we talked earlier, Kari, you asked, do I recruit my kids, and looking at that sort of list of categories of expectations for self and for them, depending on your child and their willingness, you could certainly have conversations, especially with adolescents and older teenagers, about how might you kind of pare back or manage and shift around your expectations of yourself. Not every kid is going to have the capacity to kind of go there and have that conversation. If your kid does, I say go for it, because the truth is we have to remember, on the other side as well, all of the schools accepting students, like everybody is having to modify expectations. So we may not be able to access all of those extracurriculars and things to get me into that school or to build my resume. But guess what? They know that. they're aware of that. So everybody's modifying at the same time, right? So I think that reminder that, I read the other day, a parent was, feeling really concerned. My kid's going to miss out on all these math skills potentially.
Sure.
And the feedback was, this is a universal problem, right? So it's not just your kid in your school district. Remember, we're all figuring this out together. And, I think for kids to understand, there are no easy answers here, but we're going to problem solve as we go. It's a pretty nice opportunity to try some collaborative problem solving with your kids, and to also just kind of recognize that sometimes you have to lean into the discomfort of life. Yeah. And uncertainty is sort of the nature of being human. So to whatever extent we can, help our kids manage, some of that anxiety through whatever techniques work for them, because it's, I'm not sure this is ride is over anytime soon.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Is there anything that we can do? You hear all the time about creating me time for yourself. Well, it's exponentially harder when everybody's home all the time. So is there anything that we can do for our kids to make them feel like they are having a break? And for parents, how do we create a space or a place that allows us some time to recoup and to rest and be able to start fresh?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think when you look at, and this is the advantage of scheduling, right? So if your family decides Sunday afternoons, we're going to sit and we're going to kind of forecast for the week, which I recommend, the good news is weeks are not going to be vastly different. If your kid has class these days, they will have them, these times per day, you'll have it next week. Right. But the extras, those sort of gaps, build in as much as you are comfortable with time connecting with other kids, whether that's with masks and you're, 10 feet apart outside. Be intentional about it, with other families that feel comfortable doing the same. Mm-hmm. I think early on, it was sort of exciting for kids. We can Zoom and have Zoom parties and everybody's watching Zoom movies. That lost its luster pretty quickly.
Yes,
so I think we need to be the ones to really encourage our kids, even older kids. My 13-year-old, I'm having to help prompt some of that, reach out to moms, even though they're perfectly capable. Kids are not sure what to do. Who can I call? Whose parents are comfortable? We've got birthday parties coming up. Get outside. The good news is this is going to be in the fall. Weather's pretty good, even in Oregon. We can get out there with umbrellas. Get out as much as possible, because if this does extend for the winter, at least we've filled some of that need for connectivity, and we can resume more virtual connection through the winter.
Right.
But time for ourselves, I'm not sure they're, again, modify. That might just be a 10-minute walk around the block, but give yourself that. If you were someone who was able to go to Pilates 3 times, well, that may not happen. Give yourself something, because you can't serve your kids well if you are completely depleted, obviously.
Right. Well, and I feel like that sort of goes along with, I know you and I have talked about advocating for your kids. And, advocating for them, for their teacher, if they feel overwhelmed, but also advocating for them at home. And, we're the ones that are observing them the most now because they aren't at school. And, being able to register if they need a break, and being okay with that, and not having that shame that we're not keeping them on track for, that whole entire school year's worth of curriculum that they're supposed to be learning.
That's right. And other parents don't realize this, and from where I sit, I'm able to see it in my work. Yeah. Lots and lots of parents are asking for that same break for their child, or extension on an assignment. So just know, as parents, you're not the only one asking. It does not reflect poorly on you as a parent. You are just honoring your kids' needs, and you're prioritizing their wellness over maybe those extra division problems this week.
Right.
For the most part, teachers, if we are consistently advocating for our kids, I'm assuming we'll be really flexible.
Yeah, let's hope. I'm hopeful that they will too. They're all in the same situation.
We're all in the same boat. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So we're about to have to wrap up, but Kari or Chris, any kind of last minute thoughts or something that came up that you'd like to kind of expand a little bit on before we have to take off?
I do have one other question in regards to motivation. I feel like different kids are going to be motivated by different things, whether internally or externally. If we're having a hard time with them, keeping them on task, or they just don't feel like doing much at all, is there a tool that we can use that engages them in finding a little bit of motivation to get through maybe a rocky day, that doesn't just say, okay, go play Xbox for the next 8 hours?
Right. I lean into a schedule to the point of obnoxious in my work, because it can serve so many purposes and it teaches so many skills. If you have a schedule, one of the advantages of homeschooling is that the day is longer. At school, you've got a finite number of hours. You can stretch the day out for your child. So, if you have a kid who's going to be motivated by doing some kind of physical games and shooting hoops, and you wouldn't normally feel comfortable building that in and taking a break, between math and reading, do it. Prioritize that and do the work a little bit later in the day. It's tricky because I think as adults, we feel unmotivated in large part as well. So remember, we create this kind of mirror situation. They feel our energy. And I certainly don't think excusing kids from work multiple days and over the course of weeks is appropriate. There may be times when you need a mental health day. I think all of us have taken off a day of work because we need a mental health day. But you know what? Maybe the day is longer. Maybe you're doing things, ask some things after dinner that you might not have done otherwise. But motivation is typically derived from our environment. So there may be some need to look at incentivizing. Incentives can go a long way. So again, if you adopt this approach where you empathize with your child, let them understand how hard this is, that you see this. Ask them what they would like. I mean, kids are full of great ideas. How do they want to structure their day? What's going to motivate them? Ask them. Right. We oftentimes as parents feel so responsible for generating solutions.
Yeah.
Ask the person who you're for whom you're trying to solve the problem. Just ask.
Right.
And really the takeaway for me, if we had to sort of walk away and say, okay, what have I learned here? What can I do right out the gate? It's going to be looking at, expectations and empathy. If nothing else, get out your sticky notes right now with your red pen. Do it. Start looking at expectations. And and even if it feels contrived, empathize with your kid. Because I honestly think we all can empathize during this, so.
Right. I love that. There's going to be a rush on Amazon sticky notes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Probably.
I'm going to do that right away.
I love it.
Like different colors. I love all the multicolored.
Yeah, different colors. Let's make it art.
Different color for your kids. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Well, I really appreciate going over all of this information, and I'm hoping that we can refer back to it and we have this idea in our head of lowering those expectations or reprioritizing them and having a little empathy for ourselves and our kids.
Amen.
Yes.
Amen. Don't beat yourself up.
Yeah.
So many people are used to being perfect about everything.
Yeah.
And, you can't always be perfect. And don't.
You should have done this from my car so I can show everybody what a reprioritized dirty car looks like.
Yeah.
Right? Let it go. Listen, this isn't forever. Let it go for now if you have to.
Just like the song.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Chris. This was really helpful. And thank you, Kari. It was a brilliant conversation. I really, really think it's helpful, and it was enjoyable, and I think on a lot of levels are going to help a lot of people. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And, if anyone has any further questions, you can shoot them to me. You can shoot them to at steve@landerholmlaw.com, or you can post it here and we will get you connected with Chris. And with that, until next time, as always, everyone stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy the day, enjoy your kids.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Bye. Thanks, Kari.
Bye.
So long.
Okay.
Bye.